Have you ever had a moment in your life when you just felt so strongly about something that you were willing to go against the majority? You went against what everybody else was saying or doing. You were willing to take the opposite side of an argument even if you didn't have all the facts. Maybe you had a boss that everybody liked except for you, so you quit your job and took another one just because you couldn't stand working for that guy. Or maybe you had a group of friends who did things that were morally wrong but socially acceptable, and you drew the line in the sand and said, "I'm not going to participate in this." Jonathan did something like that in today's passage, and it cost him his life. Listen to this. 1 Samuel chapter 14 verse 6. Now it happened on the third day in the morning that David rose early, and he called upon God, and he cried out and said, "Alas, alas, that I should be sojourner in Israel and a stranger from the sight of the Lord, seeing I am this day hid from the face of the king." So David rose and went from Saul's house, and Jonathan did not go with him, nor did any man go with him. Now Jonathan followed after David because his heart was stirred by the Lord. This is the second time that Jonathan has followed David in the last 3 chapters. Chapter 12, verse 25. It says that Jonathan followed after him because Jonathan loved him. As a matter of fact, we've already read this passage twice before, but we're gonna read it again. Verse 25. Jonathan followed after him because Jonathan loved him as his own soul. But Saul had restrained him, saying, "You shall not go out with him. You shall not become one of his ways." But Jonathan went. Okay, 3 observations. Number 1. Jonathan is acting out of character. If you go back and read 1 Samuel 18, remember when Jonathan and Saul were at their house and David came in to play the harp for them, and Saul was having a fit and was throwing his spear, and Jonathan stood up in the midst of that and made a public spectacle of himself by rebuking his father in front of David. But now Jonathan is following after King Saul's orders. He's going along with what the king wants to do. Why would he do that? Is it because Jonathan loves David more than Saul? No, it's because he loves Saul more than David. Jonathan's first loyalty is to his father, the king. That's why he's following the king's orders. No. 2. Saul has given Jonathan an order, a direct order, but he doesn't give a reason for that order. He just tells him, don't go with him, don't follow after him. But there's no reason given. Why? Well, I think the author leaves that up to the reader. We can infer that Saul doesn't want David to be a bad influence on Jonathan, to continue to be a bad influence on him. And in some ways, that's true. It's been a bad influence, because Jonathan has left his father's house. He's abandoned his post, he's left his duty, and he's gone to stay with David and the Philistines, his supposed enemies, where they're living incognito. But number 3, Jonathan doesn't just say, "Okay, you're right, Dad, I'm not gonna go." He doesn't argue with the king. He doesn't try to make a case. He just does what he's told to do. He goes along with it. Why does he do that? Because that's the way the world works. Kings get to make the rules. They get to make the laws. They get to decide what happens in the kingdom. The bottom line is, Jonathan is playing politics. Jonathan is being a politician. What's the lesson for us? When we work for an organization, there are rules and regulations and policies. There are chains of command, and there are people in authority over us. And sometimes we have to go along with what those people want to do, even though we might not agree with them. Jonathan had a heart that was stirred by the Lord. He had a passion for God, and yet he had a job to do. And sometimes our job requires us to go along with people who don't share our passion, who don't have the same heart for God that we have. So how do we handle those situations? Well, Jonathan handled it by obedience. He just simply obeyed his father. He didn't argue. He didn't complain. He just did what he was told to do. Now, that doesn't mean we keep our mouth shut. That doesn't mean we never speak up. There are times to speak up, like when you're making an argument and somebody doesn't agree with you. You can still respectfully disagree. You can still lovingly disagree. And Jonathan did that earlier in the book. But sometimes you just have to go along with the plan, even if you don't agree with it.